A warm welcome to the Pari Center and to the first meeting of our book club. Each month, we will be asking a distinguished person to choose a book and host a discussion session with our book club members. This month, award-winning novelist and short story writer Alison MacLeod has chosen F. David Peat's The Blackwinged Night, Creativity in Nature and Mind. Alison's novel Tenderness was a New York Times Best Book of 2021, a Book of the Year for The Spectator, a Best New Book for People magazine, and the Sunday Times Historical Fiction Book of the Month. She has been longlisted for the Man Booker Prize and shortlisted for the Canada's Governor General Award for Fiction. Welcome, Alison, and it's good to see you here.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I just wanted to say a little bit about how David Peat came to write The Blackwinged Night. So in chapter 4, Silence and the Void, David tells the story of how he came to write The Blackwinged Night. It was 1994, and he was working on the David Bohm's biography, Infinite Potential. He had concluded his research and felt in need of a break before settling down to begin writing. By chance, he ended up in Pari. He writes, "We arrived in the heat of September, and for the next 3 months, I spent most of my time sitting in a chair outside the house and just looking over at the hills. Sometimes I get up and go for a walk, but most of the time, I just sit and look. Later, when I met old friends, they'd ask me, 'What did you do in Italy?' 'Nothing,' I'd reply. 'Yeah, sure,' was their answer. 'But what did you really do? Did you read a lot? Did you do any writing? Were you painting? What on earth did you do for 3 months?' No one seemed to believe that I did nothing. Now, 5 years later, I am writing this present book in the same village where I spent that time of withdrawal. Everything that is happening grew out of that fallow period. I was making compost. I was a sitting, walking compost heap. During that period, I was making the fertile soil that would nurture the seeds that were to come. The power of doing nothing is the power of silence." And with that, I will hand it over to you, Alison. Welcome.
Thank you. Am I on? Yes, I'm on.
Yes, we see you.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to see you again and to be here and to be part of the Pari Center. It's just a joy. Our relationship, Eleanor knows this, goes back, about 20 years or a little bit more maybe. It's incredible to know that this relationship has gone back and forth through time. And my very first experience of Pari was a course run by F. David Peat, by David, as he's known. So for that reason, it seemed so natural to return to his words and to return to this book, The Blackwinged Night, which was just the most amazing inspiration for me when I first read it in 2002. So we're going back to that time. It was published in 2000, and it arose, as Eleanor has just told us, from that incredible experience of David really sitting there and sort of self-fertilizing in some way that was probably mysterious even to him. So the book is something I returned to when last year I was sitting with Eleanor, with her mother Maureen, a co-founder with David of the Pari Center, with Jenna, who's a member of the team at the Pari Center. And we had the great delight of sitting on a rooftop in Florence, overlooking the Arno and just off the Ponte Vecchio. And we were talking about ways to bring, just always to refresh, that creativity is fundamentally about refreshing and renewing. And the Pari Center is this creative magnet of a hill in deep Tuscany between Florence and Siena. So we were thinking about how to renew and bring new people into the conversation. And this notion occurred to me that because books are obviously really fundamental to me and fundamental to how I live and how my inner life and outer life were formed, I thought about this book club idea, and I ran it past, we just ran it past Maureen, Eleanor, and Jenna that day. And from that little conversation in the sun, where we really didn't have any big plans, this meeting today, this conversation, this club with all of us has come to be. So I'm really, really delighted at that. And I'm just going to say a tiny bit about that strange notion of the book club, and maybe just trying to take it back to something about what is it about books, physical books, but also on-screen books, and where can they take us, and what are they really about? We've all been, well, many of us will have been to book clubs where, they're about chat and they're great, and they're often about a bit of wine, and that's great too. But I was thinking just about the possibilities, and what is the creative offering of a book. And of course, it's information, and it's probably some kind of transformative story that goes, when it works, goes deeply within us, and it changes who we are inside. We all know that. And I'm just going to be really honest, what crept up in my head, what popped up, was I was thinking about something. To me, there's something more, and I think it connects to Pari and perhaps to what we're all doing here now. And that is the sense I had with perhaps one of my earliest memories, when I was perhaps just 3 and I couldn't even yet read. But I remember I had a light, well, it was probably not much smaller than me at the time. It was a copy of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And so obviously I'm 3 years old, and the book, I remember, is cut out to the shape of Snow White herself. It's actually that shape, in a chair with the dwarves gathered around her. And so it felt very, very alive in that way. And I don't know if I've told anyone even this before, but I remember standing there and just clutching or holding that, pressing that book to me with a sense, an instinct, if I'm honest, a really strong instinct that book was alive in some way. And that sense of a book being alive is a childish sense on the one hand, and yet for me still an entirely real thing. And of course, it applies to paintings, it applies to music, it probably applies to scientific formulae in a way I'm not capable of understanding. But any act of creation, I think, is active. It has agency of its own strange kind that I don't know if any of us can fully articulate, but I think many of us have an instinct or a sense of that, and especially if we're creators, if we're making, and most of us in our lives in some way, shape or form, as David says so brilliantly in this book, are making, we're creating, we are a creative life form. Every night when we dream, we can see the extent of our creative imaginations to make. So I had that sense, that primitive sense of a child's, of a book being an alive thing. That's partly what brings me here today. As I was rereading The Blackwinged Night for today, I was reminded, as I was near the end, of David telling me, as he told me once before, but he reminds me here, the notion that a book or a painting or whatever the form might be was for his mentor, the physicist David Bohm, that a book or a piece of art was a piece of active information. And for David Bohm, the physicist, that creation was holding information that is still something we're struggling to fully articulate, but that it had an animate quality, it had perhaps an agency, it had a force running through it. So make of that what you will. But I thought I'd put that out there because it connects today through David and David Bohm, David Peat and David Bohm, going right back to, I suppose, what's fundamental for me as your chairperson today. I'm going to say a little bit more about Pari in a moment, but I just wanted to remind us that this book is absolutely exploding with ideas. I mean, rereading it again, it took the top off my head again. And I'll be honest, I knew I would enjoy it again. I knew I'd probably love it again, but I didn't expect to read this again and to be so fired up with it. I didn't expect it to inspire me in such a big way all over again. And, I think of it not just as a book I love, but really as a gift that dropped into my life. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what your experiences were. They might be entirely different. It might have left you confounded or frustrated because there's such a wide-ranging exploration, as we know, of classical science, of quantum theory, of quantum mechanics, of philosophy, classical philosophy, philosophy of science, metaphysics, poetry, painting, sculpture. The list goes on and on. Mysticism, religion. The list is it seems endless, and yet it's not a kind of list, bum, bum, dum, dum, dum. It's a web. I think David has given us this web of meaning that I find absolutely compelling in a way I hadn't realized I would in returning to it today. So the notion of our book club, and this is our first or the inaugural session for the Pari Center, and fundamentally, I just want to welcome you all. That's really what I'm here to do. And I'm not here, I'll be, just really honest, I'm not here to try to teach the book because I'm not qualified to do that. I'm only qualified in my own little area. But I'm fascinated by it in all sorts of ways. So I hope at least a few of you might be as well. You're here and you're interested, and that's the best starting point always, as we all know, for a conversation. A book club, in my view, is essentially a conversation. And this is my sitting room behind me. I can't fit everyone into my living room, but you are more or less in my living room. And if I could pour everyone a cup of tea or a glass of wine, I would do that as well. But for the moment, we have the gift Zoom, which is this big open space. And I'm reminded of something David says in the book, how he says that conversation, that speech, first of all, and you'll probably remember this from your own reading, is inherently creative. And he goes into all sorts of directions to tell us why. And he says, I hope you'll agree by the end of the chapter that every time we speak, we are exercising an incredible creative power, a power that ripples through our entire society. So I think, okay, no pressure then, Alison. A power that ripples through our entire society. Well, we're not aiming for our entire society today. We'll just put that out there for starters. But we are aiming, I think, for a dialogue, and I hope you feel really welcome and easy about contributing in whatever form seems right for you today. So I'm going to, in a sense, kick us off and move into the book a little bit in terms of, well, I'll come to that, but I'm going to lead us forward a little bit. I'll dive in, and then I'm going to try to open it up more widely as the session goes on. So the fundamental thing to say is welcome, and I'm really thrilled to be here and to have you here. I'm going to turn to, just to give you a sense of the book, and again of how I came to it. So I'm going to share a screen, and I want to say, don't worry, there isn't a very long PowerPoint coming. I like eye contact, and I like conversation with faces. So, but it's a little brief PowerPoint. I'll just bring up And with any luck, let me just come to it. Okay. Okay, so I sense that's visible, which is great. Eleanor, all good? I'm going to, before I open up the PowerPoint.
Looks great. Yeah, looks great.
Okay, all right. So this is my own sort of memory of when I first came to the Blackwinged night, creativity in nature and mind. And as I said, this week on rereading, and the first time I read it, the experience is really that sense of here is someone speaking about ideas that have fascinated me endlessly, as a writer, as a creator, as a thinker, but also as somebody who simply lives in a body on this planet, on this earth, and has intuitions and a sense that those feed how I move forward, how I evolve, how I fall backwards in life, and yes, in create my writing, in my writing life as well. But it begins with us simply being creative people who dream at night, who whose brains, as David suggests in the Blackwinged Night, register meaning as 50% of what we're actually looking at, and 50%, it's argued, coming from within the processes of the body and brain itself. So, okay. Just click forward. This is just a tiny thing. Some of you will know of the work of Peter Vollenberg, excuse me, Peter, and his On the Way We Talk About Forests. And I really like this just as we begin the book club. It's brief. And it's about the book, the very thing of the book. Our deep relationship with the forest is echoed in language. The word book reveals an early connection. If you trace its origin, you come to the Brothers Grimm of fairy tale fame, of my Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In a dictionary of the German language that they published in 1860, they mentioned that old German characters were scratched onto wooden boards. And because these boards often came from beech trees, Buche in German, which is pronounced Buche, I think, in English, the name for such writing tablets was transferred from the tree to the functional object, Buch, the book. But the term could possibly have arisen much earlier when runes were carved into wooden sticks made of beech. In German, where letters are Buchstaben, Buch for beech and Stab for stick, this gets us one level deeper, for with Buchstaben, it is much easier to see the origin of the word. Although neither this nor the assertion made by the Brothers Grimm has been proven with absolute certainty, I like the idea, he says, that every book has us looking back to the forest. So from that very sort of simple account, I get something I find quite touching. I get something I find actually quite meaningful about the way what's happening in here as we read and as we write, and as together, reader and writer, we co-author something. I absolutely believe that as I'm writing, as I think any good writer does, you're co-creating the meaning. It's not me delivering it onto the page in a fully realized form. It's made by both me and the reader. And from what's happening in here, we're going out to the boards that we hold in our hands, and back even more fundamentally into an experience of walking in woodland, in the forest, which is a place where I spent a lot of time growing up in Nova Scotia in Canada. So that I found interesting myself. It reminds me too that the word novel is of course about the novel, the new, novelty, but it also relates in terms of its etymology to a green sapling, to that which is a new shoot, a green shoot. Okay, and even to star, a new star as well. All right. So here we are, Blackwinged Night, and this is David on the day that I picked it up, that I bought it in the Pari Center, and I remember being really excited to find it, and even more excited when I began reading it. So we're going back 22 years, and even there, David's just he just really met me, and yet his affection is just readily available. He just sort of brimmed with energy and goodwill, and really quite a wicked sense of humor as well. So here's David in teaching. I went along to do a sort of physics course, a short physics course for lay people who were curious, and David was. It was his design, it was his course, and Maureen and he had founded the center. Here he's looking, I must say, quite serious, and he's listening as well. He's listening intently, but it rolled between this kind of terrific rush of ideas, as you can hear in the Blackwinged Night, and great enthusiasm, the curiosity of a boy, which I loved. And then just kind of moments of real laughter and silliness, and really loving quite a witty, even a dark joke. So that's the two of us back 20 years ago, I think, on that first trip I made. Might have been my second, I can't quite remember, but it's first or second. That's us at Maureen and David's dinner table. So it was all based around curiosity, creativity, food, the body, the village of Pari, about walking, about conversing, and about sitting outside the bar, the cafe bar, and having long chats. So conversation is where, and dialogue, that's where everything in Pari begins. And this he mentions in the book about doing his sort of perambulation around the village of Pari, which is on the hilltop in Tuscany, where Eleanor is now hosting us. And this is just one little picture of it gives you a sense of the beauty of the place. I'm going to maybe come to that later, and I'm going to close this down for the moment. Let me just stop share. Okay. All right, everyone. So I'm going to now just have a little swig of water. And I want to move to say a little bit about our format for today, just so you know where you are. I know usually when I do any kind of session, I just sort of like to know the basic plan of a meeting, of a gathering. And in this case, I'm going to say a little bit now in a few minutes about I suppose those elements of the book, and I'll be honest, it was so hard to choose. My book is absolutely marked up and dog-eared and underlined. I desecrate every book I own by underlining it, and I think that's, for me, if someone were to mark up one of my own books, I'd be honored. So I try to return that honor. In this case, one idea was constantly leading to another. I was absolutely fascinated, but for today, I'm going to just try to select one little strand of what fascinated me, and perhaps the primary idea that first attracted me to the Blackwinged Night. And David said something about it in one of our seminars in Pari. And when I asked him about it, he said that he actually says a little bit more about it in here, and actually quite a bit more about it. So that's why I bought it, and that's where it all began for me. So I'm going to return to that just to bring David's voice into the room, so to speak, to begin our conversation. And the thing I love about Blackwinged Night is it is really David's voice behind it. I can hear his huge enthusiasms. I can hear all of his questions and his, genuine sort of wrestling with questions. and not rushing for the sake of a thesis to any quick assumption. He's really more about the asking of questions than he is about any thesis. So he has his own inclinations, and he tells us, for example, that for him, the so-called inanimate world, or many elements of it, once we get to the level of, beyond coffee cups and beyond tables, when we move up into kind of living organisms, that the world for him was conscious. Now, he doesn't push that idea onto any of us, but he actually only mentions it once quite briefly in here. But it is, I suppose, his great curiosity to know how that might be possible, and if there is a consciousness underlying physical reality and not only in our brains, then how might that relate to the imagination, the human imagination wedded to the body, and how might it also lead to transformations or a sense of evolution for each of us? So what might that process be? And he applies it, of course, as we know, or he examines it, he investigates it in relation to not just designated creative people, such as writers and painters, but he looks at it in relation to scientists, which isn't always the obvious thing. And I love the fact that he takes us there, because he's got the mind that is the bridge between the arts and the sciences. I'm fascinated by that bridge, but I don't have the mind that can travel back and forth in the same way that he could as a physicist. He could travel into the arts with absolute, astonishing insight and knowledge. So he was, it's appropriate perhaps that he lived near Florence, because he is a sort of Renaissance man in his own right, or he was a Renaissance man, I should remember. His voice is so alive in Blackwinged Night that that it seems to me as I was reading it that he was in a sense present. He describes in close detail, beautiful detail, something like as simple as the buying of a loaf of bread, and how that bread was so fresh. And this is where creativity is. It's not only in so-called creators, but the baker's bread, this whole wheat loaf in Ottawa, where he used to live, there was somehow some element of it that made it seem so fresh each morning. And when he spoke to his baker, the baker said, yes, I thank you, for noticing. I really put all my love and attention in the detail of it, as a creator would. And that it's just interesting that David, even through his taste buds, somehow picked up on some qualitative difference in those loaves of bread. So that's interesting. But then he takes us up through the arts and through sciences, from village life globally and cosmically, right up to or right back to, depending on our direction of time, Big Bang and the origins of the universe, and how that might relate to a fundamental creative action within the universe. Again, I'm not articulate about Big Bang origins. We have David's voice here, and some of you, especially if you're scientifically minded or scientists yourselves, you might want to draw our attention to that. For the moment, I'm just going to turn to, as promised, a couple of bits that really fascinated me, and it begins with Cézanne. I'm a great lover of Cézanne's work, Paul Cézanne, the painter, and David had spent a great deal of time thinking about Cézanne. And this is the bit I heard David read in our session that day, and I'll try to sort of follow through a little bit from there. So it's just lifting the voice of the book, and I think a sort of seminal idea from the book, and offering it to you as listeners for the moment. And I'm hoping you might, in turn, as the session goes on, feel welcome to offer up favorite or inspiring moments or questions of your own. So he says, he begins, in all these examples, nature, I will just tell you too, in case you're following along or would like to, in this edition, I should say, it's on page 37 at the bottom, okay? In all these examples, nature is a living agent, a power, a presence. Moreover, the works have arisen out of, so he's talking about a variety of works by artists engaging with nature. Moreover, the works have arisen out of the artist's or writer's ability to merge horizons with the natural world. This is the essence of the statement made by Paul Cézanne as he painted the motif from nature. He's a landscape painter. And Paul Cézanne says, the landscape becomes reflective, human, and thinks itself through me, I make it as an object, let it project itself and endure within my painting. I become the subjective consciousness of the landscape, and my painting becomes its objective consciousness. And he then lets us know who that, it's a writer called Richard Schiff who quotes that from Cézanne. This sense of the immanence, David says, in nature can also be present in music, and he goes on to give us examples. But I'm going to turn forward and just stick with Cézanne for the moment. If I go to page 52, I'm a little bit 2/3 of the way down the page, and we have the painter, Cézanne, he's returning to Cézanne, gave great importance to the little sensations in the body he experienced before the motif, so before the breakthrough visual motif. These sensations were the source of all his work. Yet the act of painting itself was a long and sometimes painful process for him. His little sensations had to find their realization on the canvas in such a way that the entire structure of the painting was engineered as carefully as any bridge or skyscraper. So David's returning to previous conversations. And he goes on to give other examples, but I'm going to move again a little bit forward and turn to page, when David comes back to Cézanne, we're on page 204. I've got a note, let me just see, yes. Okay, so I'm moving now just ahead, again, still staying with Cézanne, just to try to keep a line of continuity going for us. And David says, now we're near the end of the book, we're just before conclusions, and David returns to Cézanne, and he says, Recall Cézanne's remark quoted in chapter 2 about his feeling when working before the motif. And again, he repeats the words, the landscape becomes reflective, human, and thinks itself through me. I become the subjective consciousness, and so on. Given the artist's other remarks, it appears that this is no mere metaphor or figure of speech. It is not so much something he believed, or for beliefs depend upon faith. Rather, it is a practical account of the way he acted out his life as a painter. For Cézanne, nature was something truly alive, something that spoke directly to him. In turn, his work assisted nature in becoming explicit. I find that a remarkable line. His work, in turn, assisted nature in becoming explicit, Cézanne felt. As for myself, David says, I feel that I can also access this consciousness, or the consciousness of that landscape, in front of, when he's standing in front of Cézanne's canvas. It is almost as if the consciousness of nature had been absorbed upon the surface of the canvas, transforming it and giving it a particular activity in which we, the viewers, can participate. We all become nature's participators, for we're all changed with creativity. The way this creativity can flourish in the lives of each one of us will be the topic, he says, of the final chapter of conclusions. So the whole book really is about how the creativity embodied within, let's say, let's for sake of argument, as Cézanne believed, within the world around us, in landscapes, perhaps, in city landscapes as well. We're not excluding, we're not making it only of the natural world. It's hard quite to know where man-made creation might also carry its own landscape of meaning of information, but information in that active information sense. And I'll remind you of something he said that relates, I think, because for me, the idea of all the ideas I'm so interested in, and there are so many in this book, my mind really does explode with it. But again, just for us today, that notion of each of us as a receiver, I think is fascinating. And it's certainly been a huge part of my writing process. I would feel lost without it. I would, not only would I feel lost, there wouldn't be books to show. That's how intimate and real a process it is for me. And the comparison now here will be quite ludicrous, because I'm about to jump with no connection at all to David's reference to Mozart on page 166. It's just one line, and David notes along the lines of this conversation, Mozart spoke of compositions appearing to him whole, as if for him music existed all of a piece outside linear sequential time. So as if, and this is common to many people who create, and to many creative scientists, we know from history as well. David goes into some examples, but we know that there is sometimes, Roger Penrose speaks about it, about the notion that somehow in the cliched word, but I'll use it for the moment, is a flash, that something seems to arrive wholly formed, even if it's going to take all of the labor and all of one's skill to render that in a form, a vessel that coheres, has order, balance, and can reach out and communicate whatever that whole thing was that dropped. So he speaks of Mozart, he refers briefly to Mozart. He speaks more at length in a fascinating way, connecting again, just as for Cézanne, the body. So it's not an ethereal process. It's not something that's happening by lightning strike to certain geniuses out, on mountaintops, or hermit mystics in their caves, or in their fallen down huts. It's not about the ethereal or the abstract. It's rooted absolutely in the body. And one of the best descriptions, not only this Cézanne, who begins us thinking about that connection, but also David takes it back to a really brilliant, it's only about 2 pages, description of Stravinsky's process. So we're going to obviously over to music now, and to Michael Tippett, again, Sir Michael Tippett, the composer. Those discussions, I won't open up and read them for you, but along the lines, if you're interested, as I am, in this particular strand of thinking, and the book is so dazzling with its ideas, or at least it was for me, that it's hard to know where to go back and find something. But that section was talking about creative reception of something from outside us. He takes it back to comments by both Stravinsky and Michael Tippett. And he speaks in a wider sense about this idea in relation to many artists, poets, nature writers, painters, musicians throughout. He also takes it to the body of Einstein, into Einstein's notions of the body and creative breakthrough in terms of science, obviously. And he gives it to us in detail on page 182 about the physicist and David's mentor, David Bohm. That really beautiful description of the body as the source of reception and of breakthrough happens on page 182. And then I'm just going to finish my little bit by taking us back to David himself. And he speaks about this in terms of his own writing experience. David was not only a top physicist who studied at the University of Liverpool and was then affiliated to Birkbeck College here in the UK, and I think Kingston, Ontario. I would have to check his bio. He then went on to work for the National Research Council of Canada in Ottawa, top government lab for all breakthrough science. And increasingly, I know that David became frustrated, although it was his major point of his career, but he also, I don't know, frustrated, but he had a sense that as governments do, was beginning to close down the creative side of science, what he called the blue sky thinking of science, and government grants were increasingly, or government budgets were increasingly tied to very measurable outcomes. David began to feel more distant in that role and to pull away. And part of that pulling away led to the founding, as I understand it, and I hope I'm doing him justice, of Pari Center. Now that's enough of a mind at work and a person at work. But also, in addition to that, he wrote 23 books, I believe. So I'm just going to read us, to finish off my little bit, a section about David. And David, he's saying about his own process. I am suggesting that the first stages of creative work are contained within the body, out of the direct light of conscious awareness, The next stage requires externalizing the work into the world of the manifest. And the manifest, he's taking us into a discussion of a key idea for the Hopi tribe, okay, and the indigenous Hopi tribe of North America. He says, so the next stage requires externalizing the work into the world of the manifest, the world of space, time, matter, and society. In the case of a dancer or an athlete, this could take the form of physical movement. For a painter, it could be the gesture made by a brush. Earlier in this chapter, we saw how Patrick Heron's work, painter, began with an uncomfortable conversation that grew into a sort of palpitation, which spread upward and outward into the muscles. The muscles of his right arm became agitated by a flow of electric energy. For others, manifestation may be spoken, written, or even voiced internally. Let me give my own experience, he says, which has been more or less the same whether I'm doing theoretical physics, writing a play, David wrote plays, or thinking about a new chapter for a book, such as this one. First, I arrive at something akin to a question. This is not necessarily a question that could be verbalized in a precise way. Sometimes it's a sort of pressure or edge or sense of suspension. When an actual verbal question occurs, then I may try to answer it. But more generally, I have a sensation, a sort of orientation that may be similar to that instant before one moves a hand or takes a step forward. Typically, I will hold this sensation and try not to bring it into realization. Try not to. If I'm faced with writing a new section in a book, for instance, I may experience several days of frustration, during which I find it impossible to write or even know what I want to say. Which sounds surprising for somebody as fluent as David was, but it's absolutely the case. 3 months, as Eleanor told us. But then one night, things will begin to work. Maybe I'm awakened by a thought, or perhaps when I awake in the morning, I soon find myself typing several paragraphs at high speed, trying to get the material out before I'm interrupted or distracted. Only later will I read it over and begin to edit the text. At this point, it is almost as if, this is the interesting bit, almost as if I'm reading pages written by a different person, but in my style. The words seem totally fresh and on occasion quite surprising, like nothing I have thought up to that point. Okay, I find those words so compelling and really quite moving as well, because the process is a difficult one. It's a labor, it's a creative labor, whether it's science, art, or the man baking bread. It's a labor, and if you give all your attention to it, attention, I firmly believe, is a form of love. It's a form of dedication, and it takes energy, and it doesn't provide immediate answers, and we walk, as Virginia Woolf described with a new piece of work, going into a room as if it's hard to imagine Virginia Woolf in a miner's headlamp, but try for a moment, a miner's headlamp, and only able to light up. You walk into a darkened room, that's the new piece of work. And you've got an inkling of your orientation, as David says, but Woolf describes only being able to light up with that little lamp, a tiny bit of the room at a time. It's as painstaking and as much of a risk as that. She's walking into the unknown each time. And then when she discovers the key vision that tells her this is the true place to be, she then has to piece together detail by detail the whole of that room. And not only that, but then find the form. The room is not the form is something else. So that is my revisiting of the book, and my attempt to convey to you what a gift the book has been to me. And that's the only word I would use for it, a gift. However, we're all very different as readers. You will have noticed other things, which is brilliant. And, you know, we can tire of our own thoughts. You will have noticed other things. You will have noticed underlined other bits. So I thought I will just take a couple of questions for the moment, and then I'm going to turn us into, I'm going to turn us over to little groups, small groups, just to do some exchange. We're a large group here today, so we'll go into breakout rooms, which many of you I know will be just have lots to say in. If you're someone who thinks, oh, I'm a bit shy, or I'm just not that comfortable, or I would just like to have a 15-minute break, then of course just you can just turn off your screen at that point and join us at the point when Eleanor or Michael calls us back in. But just for the moment, I just want to make sure, just check in on everyone and ask, without going, because my views in a sense are the least important, but I wanted to kick us off with David's voice and his voice of Cézanne above all. Does anyone have just a comment or something that might lead us forward into a wider group conversation? Any questions at this stage? If not, well, absolutely fine, and we'll just move into groups. But if there is anything, we'll just keep our eye out for hands. I just wanted to pause and check in. Anything at all? Okay.
I could say something, Ali.
Yeah, yes, please do. Is that Sally?
Hi. It is, yes. Hi,
Oh,
it's nice to
Sally.
see
I'm not seeing Sally, sorry, because I'm only seeing a few of us.
That's fine. No.
Oh, Sally.
And you, I just wanted to say a couple of things, because most of us aren't writers or scientists or
Exactly.
anything. So I just wanted to reference all McGilchrist's work and to say, I think as Dave Shrum said here once or twice, we all have a right hemisphere. So
Yes.
that's one thing. And then the other thing was, I don't know if you have, but I've been reading Hanif Qureshi's blog since
he's a friend.
a tetraplegic. And one of the things I found...
Perhaps I should just pause and say, a lot of people won't know
yes,
Hanif Qureshi's work. Hanif Qureshi is a British novelist, playwright, screenwriter, phenomenal. And he's now, I'm not sure, Hanif's in his late 60s. He had a fall last Boxing Day, and long story short, is now, as Sally has just said, a tetraplegic. Yes, sorry, back to you, Sally.
It was only just to say one of the many interesting things he said in the blog that he now writes for anybody to read is that he's had, when lots of his friends visit to come and feed him, help him dress, they've been doing a rota. He says he's often, when he meets a friend, he'll have an evening in a social group or whatever. But this is kind of one-to-one friends, and they're sitting in a small room together in his hospital room until he went home, and talking until one runs out of conversation, as one does perhaps after 2 or 3 hours, but still there are things to do, or they've said they'll stay till he falls asleep. And then he says that's the interesting bit, when you get to the place where you've said all your news and all the thoughts that have come from all you've read, and suddenly you're in a slightly awkward space where you think, well, what now? what really? And so I just want, at the start of the conversation, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Sally. That's an absolutely apt comment and thing to select, that within one of the most beautiful chapters for me in the Blackwinged Night is David's chapter on silence and on gaps and intervals, and those moments that Sally's just described when we're really quite naked in such moments and vulnerable, and great meaning happens in those moments. Particularly, they require a risk of some kind. So it's Virginia Woolf's dark room. It's the silence of that Sally just described so beautifully. And it's just those points of uncertainty. So uncertainty is that emptiness out of which, as David describes, great potential can arise. Okay, on the note of great potential, and I see Michael's raised his hand, and Michael, apologies, but I'm going to switch us now over to the group chats, having had that beautiful note from Sally. And thank you, Michael. Please do, we'll pick up when we return from groups with your comment, Michael. Michael, who's helping us host, Michael, if you can remind me of that. We're going to return and begin with Michael. Thank you, Michael, for putting up your hand. We're going to turn over to groups now, and I'm going to suggest we meet in our breakout rooms for 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back and share what we can in our time. Okay, so yeah, 15 minutes, because I don't want to rush you within that time. Let's switch over to the breakouts. Thank you, Michael, for arranging that for us. Welcome back. My head is still fizzing from the conversation in our room and the great generosity of it in all sorts of ways that I think are absolutely in keeping with the book. But I would love to turn over to Hans now, to your questions or your comments. In the interest of getting in as many people as possible, we'll try to keep a focus, and perhaps if you're choosing lines that are significant for you from the book or ideas, you might keep that as condensed as possible so we can bring in as many voices. Okay, so we're going to return to Michael at the beginning because Michael's hand was up. So
Yeah. Michael, if you could unmute yourself and I'll spotlight you. Spotlight. Spotlight. Oops. There we go.
Oh, there you are, Michael.
Okay, I'm here. Okay.
Hello.
Well, I'll be very brief because Christopher and I kind of dominated the conversation in the room, and I don't want to continue that. But you know, basically, what we were talking about is to move. Alison, by the way, I'm from New Brunswick, so hi across the bay.
Hello.
So we talked about moving from what you were talking about, the relationship between David Peat and the Cézanne, particularly the Cézanne canvas, where he felt he was almost brought a consciousness, you know, to the landscape, that sort of thing. To speaking about Klein,
Yes.
which he does around page 102, 103, and bringing us before the void, you know,
Yes.
is almost agreeing or linking with Klein in Klein's statement, I want to enter the void.
Yeah.
And I think I think the point of the book is to bring us there in some way or other. And that's in a sense the imagery we get out of the Blackwinged night. It's, you know, the night is the
Yes.
void.
Yes, it is that dark room, the big dark room.
Yeah, so that's basically the essence of the conversation between Christopher and I, unless Christopher wants to say something more about it. I think we've kind of said enough.
Michael, thank you for highlighting that for us. It's with all the transformative potential, it is the other side. One does not exist without the other. So thank you very much for highlighting it for us. And it takes us to Sally's comment about the silence as well in those gaps.
Yeah.
But the void being the void being even more fundamental. Thank you, Michael. And I don't know if Christopher or we have any other hands who would like to comment at this stage or just mention something that was of interest to them as they yes, Raymond, hello.
Hello. I just wanted to say it was an incredible synchronicity that the quote I had picked to talk about was the same one you had mentioned on Cézanne on page 204. And this is my second time reading of the book. And the first time I read, I had a series of Venn diagrams overlapping circles, and thought of when I'm experiencing a work of art, I'm always in one circle, going through the work of art, from my consciousness, going through the work of art to get to the consciousness of the creator.
Yeah.
And that creator has been receptive, as you called it, has been bringing in the consciousness from nature. So I just wanted to say a couple of things that in reading the book this time, it reinforces for me what I believe, that creativity is the center of human consciousness, not rationality, not imagination, not even spirituality, but creativity. And that the second thing is something that's that consciousness is fundamental and matter is the emergent property of consciousness. So Descartes came up with the famous mantra, I think, therefore I am. And for me, this book reinforces a different mantra. I would say, we create, therefore we become.
We create, therefore we become. That's beautifully put, and I think really, really fitting. Thank you, Raymond. That's so interesting. It really is. We create, therefore we become. Yeah, and that would be, if I were to follow through another line within the book, it would have to do with acts of becoming, everything in flux, and how that the flux from the great potential, the quantum vacuum, the great void, whatever we want to call it, but change, transformation, flux, and becoming process rather than object thinking, process rather than product. Yeah, it's been something I've been fascinated for many years. So thank you for highlighting that, Raymond. And it is such an important strand: the void, transformations, reception, and acts of becoming on a daily, or if not momentary, moment by moment basis. Even the electron in acts of becoming is described so beautifully in the Blackwinged Night. Okay, I'd love to hear some other thoughts, other reactions. Did anyone find the book problematic, or have questions about it, or want to challenge something in it? And not that I'm it's the person who can take that challenge, but I'm interested in hearing anything that might be, or just more comments of points of interest. Anything? I'm holding on to a silence in this moment.
Hi, Alison.
Hi,
Do you
Michael.
we're winding down on time.
I'll be winding down. Okay. All
We're
right.
up to 23, but do you have any other insights or end caps that you'd like to share? We have a few announcements.
Okay.
But is there anything that you want to kind of bookend, or kind of closing remarks, or
Oh my goodness.
perspectives? We try to do
If we
that.
were all in my living room, I could tell you what I would do, but and maybe I'll just let people imagine it. And that is I would play a little bit. I would play the final verse of a song by, some of you might know, Nick Cave, who's a resident, or was a longtime resident, the musician Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, who I think he sends out something now called the Red Hand Files, which I'd really recommend, and many of you might know about. And I see a hand. I'm going to go to Niels's hand in a moment. I would, if you were here in my living room, I put on a speaker, I would play the end section, the sort of the finale bit of Nick Cave's song called Jubilee Street, which is a song here in Brighton. This is what song I play when I am in that gap, or in that place of that dark room, and I just stop thinking altogether, and I play Jubilee Street. And it actually, I'll just show you the lyrics. Let me share for a sec, really quickly, if I can. I do have a moment of the song. You can see, I think, now I'll just go to the next screen, play from current slide. And this is the final, and it just, he sings it, particularly if you go to the Copenhagen concert, his Copenhagen concert. It sounds random, I know, but I think there's something in this where Nick Cave is receiving something. And that's why this song, when he ends his concerts, and he's a deep, deep thinker about creativity and faith as well. But in this crescendo section at the end of the song, I am transforming, I'm vibrating, I'm glowing, I'm flying. Oh, look at me now. And if you go to that on YouTube, I can't begin to convey what happens when the reaction within the conversation of his concert, when he goes to this, and it's never not fresh. It's always completely alive. I do have a little sound clip, but I'm not going to go to that now. And then I would just, if you're here in my living room, we have a moment's silence. So all I would recommend is that maybe not long after you leave our session tonight, that you try to turn off any radio, turn off any sound. After you maybe have a listen to Nick Cave's Jubilee Street, the Copenhagen version, then just sit in silence for 5-10 minutes pick up a pen or a pencil and just see what happens in the gap. Give yourself a precise gap, 10 minutes. See what happens in terms of drawing, imagining, scribbling, writing a song, whatever it might be. Go into that gap for 10 minutes. That's what I would wish for you. And if you're here with me in this room in 3 dimensions, that's where we'd go. So I'm going to leave you with that suggestion and pass back to Michael. Oh, we've got a hand with Niels. Can we take?
No, not yet. No,
not yet.
We don't have time actually.
Okay, got it, Michael.
Could you
Oh, yeah,
share?
unshare. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Alison. This has been a great intro, great kickoff to the Book-a-Month Club. We do have a few announcements before we go. And definitely people like take time, listen to some music, take that pause and see what emerges.
Yeah.
But here are some of our announcements. All right, a very big thank you to Alison for hosting such a lively and enjoyable session today. Like I said before, what a great start to the series. And we have a few announcements. The next installment of our Book-a-Month Club series will take place on Thursday, February 15th, where John Alday will go over Quantum Questions, Mystical Writings of the World's Greatest Physicists. It's a book which was edited by Ken Wilber. Our Future Mind series begins Wednesday, January 31st, with a conversation between Robert Lawrence Kuhn and Alex Gomez Marin. We are happy to announce also that our June in-person events are now available online for registration. From June 4th to the 11th, we have Consciousness for Real, Towards a New Science of Human Experience. The speakers, Eddie Billamora, Michelle Bitbull, Monica Gagliano, Marcello Massimini on Zoom, Pavel Pielinkin, Jonathan Rowson, Vedana Shiva, and Marjorie Wollicott. This is this series, this convention will be curated and chaired by Alex Gomez Marin. June 13th through the 20th, so the next week with a day gap, we have our second Gentle Action gathering, and Gentle Action, a gathering of shared experience. To put it succinctly, a week of living in the moment for the moment. Both of these events are taking place in person in Pari, Italy. For more information, please visit the Pari Center website at paricenter.com. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Again,
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Eleanor. Huge
Thank
pleasure.
you, Alison. Thank you so much for being here
much.
today. And thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank
And
you,
we'll see
everyone,
you
for
soon
being
here at
here.
the Pari Center.
Really
Bye-bye,
lovely.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.